This is the mega global anti-fake news war room, and joining me for this very special broadcast live from Berlin, Boston, Bengaluru and Florida are some of the most engaged stakeholders in the global crusade against fake news. I'll be joined on this broadcast by Bebars Osk. He's the worldwide director of the International Fact-Checking Network, Poynter Institute from Florida. Professor Nico Mell is a lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School, former director of the Schonstein Center for Media. Professor Kanchan Kaur is a professor in journalism at the Indian Institute of Journalism and New Media, actively engaged with fighting fake news. Egan Sweeney is a fact-checking trainer, renowned globally. He runs OSINT Essentials live from Berlin. And Bal Krishna is India Today's fact-check editor. He runs the anti-fake news war room for the India Today group. The World Health Organization has been saying right from the time the coronavirus started spreading that we're dealing with an infodemic, an information pandemic, all kinds of fake news going viral, a lot of it being spread by conspiracy groups wanting to confuse people. And the problem is that fake news spreads much faster than authentic news does, and to come together to counter fake news with facts is a global challenge. What's being done to deal with this challenge? What are the problems involved in tackling fake news? Who's to blame? We'll deal with all of that. But first I want to show you the extent of the infodemic problem the world is dealing with right now.
As the world fights the deadly COVID-19 pandemic, the most challenging crisis we have faced since the Second World War, we are also seeing another epidemic, a dangerous epidemic of misinformation.
A clear warning sounded by the UN chief about the spread of the deadly coronavirus and misinformation. That was 7 weeks ago. Today, combating unverified information about COVID-19 is as challenging as finding a cure for it. While most countries are under unprecedented lockdown, the internet has now become a breeding ground for the infodemic. From absurd claims about coronavirus cure,
इस गोमूत्र से ये लाभ होगा कि किसी भी प्रकार के कोरोना, किसी भी प्रकार के जो नेगेटिविटी है आपको नहीं पकड़ेगा और स्वस्थ रहेंगे। हम पूरे विश्व से वो करते हैं, आपके पास कोई औषधि नहीं है, गोमूत्र पियो, गोबर का लेपन करो, आपको कोई वायरस नहीं पड़ेगा।
To a world leader's bizarre strategy to counter COVID-19.
Thank you very much. The disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me.
Misleading messages are traveling as fast as the virus itself. International Fact-Checking Network's Alliance on COVID-19 that brought together more than 3,500 fact-check reports from across the globe has revealed conspiracy theories, unsubstantiated health tips and racist rhetoric were infecting the world.
Some of the videos which went out on YouTube in the first week of the declaration of the emergency were getting hundreds of millions of views, and none of them are based on science.
I'm not at all surprised that the WHO has decided to call this an infodemic. The wide circulation of this misinformation can, and probably already has, claimed a lot of lives. There is enough going around to create fear and confusion in the minds of the most stable, reasonable people.
According to the Washington Post, around 2 million tweets containing conspiracy theories about the coronavirus were published over a 3-week period in January and February. A study by the Center for Informed Public says there were more than 5 million tweets linking coronavirus to 5G. Then there were claims about the vaccine. Social media is flooded with posts that say COVID-19 outbreak has been engineered by the vaccine lobby to sell their drugs. Thankfully, tech companies and the social media platforms have now swung into action. WhatsApp has launched the Coronavirus Information Hub in partnership with WHO, UNICEF and UNDP. It is also connecting people directly with public health officials so that they get trusted advice. It has also pledged a grant of $1 million to support fact-checkers. For any coronavirus-related search, Google is now placing a box with authoritative information on top of its page. On Facebook, each time a user shares a hoax link, the platform prompts them to visit a page by WHO on debunking popular COVID-19 myths. While trials for anti-coronavirus vaccine have already begun, the only cure for an infodemic is factual, reliable and scientific information. Bureau Report, India Today.
To talk about what can be done to debunk the WhatsApp University falsehoods and how we can vaccinate against the fake news virus, we're joined on this broadcast live from Berlin, Boston, Bengaluru, Florida and Delhi by some of the most deeply involved stakeholders in the global battle against fake news. I want to introduce first and foremost Bebars Orsk. He's the worldwide director of the International Fact-Checking Network at the Poynter Institute in Florida, virtually leads the global charge against fake news. The Schonstein Center for Media at the Harvard Kennedy School does a lot of work. The former director and now a lecturer, Professor Nico Mell, joins us from Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts. So welcome, Professor. With us on this broadcast also is Egan Sweeney. He's one of the world's most highly rated fact-check trainers, currently with OSINT Essentials. Professor Kanchan Kaur is deeply involved with the fact-checking project in India, is responsible for authentication of a lot of the media groups that are involved in the fact-checking project and deals with disinformation very closely. Balkrishna is our fact-check editor at the India Today's Anti-Fake News War Room. So welcome to all our guests. I want to start by asking Bebars Orsk about how widespread the disinformation pandemic has been in this whole coronavirus period. What are the global mega trends that you're looking at when it comes to this big infodemic?
Hello, Rahul. Thanks for having me today, and thank you for organizing this forum today. I think we are all on the same page when it comes to recognizing that this is an unprecedented time for all of us, and fact checkers have been also experiencing these unprecedented times with high volume of falsehoods and hoaxes to fact check. And growingly, we have been fortunate to see more and more organizations, worldwide health organization to start with, and other social media platforms have been collaborating with each other on this fight against misinformation. And fact checkers are also on the front lines on this fight against this infodemic, as righteously called by the WHO.
Professor Kanchan Kaur, there's a global infodemic and then there is a problem which is playing out in India. Bebar spoke about what's happening at the global level. I'd like you to give us a national context in terms of how fake news travels ordinarily and what are the specifics you're noticing at a time when the world is dealing with this pandemic.
Right. So this infodemic just now is a problem of is actually a part of the larger problem of fake news. In India, we've had really big trouble with fake news. 2 years ago, we had about 30 people who were lynched because there was this fake news rumor going on about child kidnapping. And those rumors don't seem to have stopped. We had that problem in Maharashtra even 10, 15 days ago, where again, 2 people were lynched and that was given a communal flavor. So it continues, this problem of fake news has actually been exacerbated with the pandemic. Firstly, because there's a really huge flood of information. Nobody knows what's exactly happening with the coronavirus, and people would love quick cures to the problem. And so so people will believe any information that comes their way, and there are lots of people giving out information, as you just showed us. So I think this is a problem that is part of the larger fake news problem issue. but there is also it's also creating a lot of trouble in the country itself. In specifics, if you look at even the mainstream media has not been able to catch up and debunk fake news as quickly as the news travels. If you look at even in Bangalore, there was some news about containment zones about 10 days ago that was not entirely true, but you had the local regional channels talking about it. Though the next day it turned out that the number of containment zones were not even a quarter of what had been put out by the TV channels. So this is a problem that really needs to be dealt with. It's huge, and I'm sure people are losing their lives doing
Professor
all
Nico
kinds
Mill
of
at the
weird things.
Harvard Kennedy School in Boston. You know, there's a fake news virus that's present in the ecosystem, even ordinarily. What are the specific global challenges you're noticing in this infodemic, the kind of problems that have come up mostly on account of the global pandemic we're dealing with?
I think there are three clear challenges, and all three have solutions, but the solutions are complicated. The first challenge is that our brains just like rumors, and generally speaking, the crazier the better. So we have to have in our education systems ways of training our brains to evaluate and think critically. The second big challenge is that the speed with which misinformation and fake news spread is unprecedented. We've always had fake news. As long as humans have been alive, rumors and fake news have proliferated. But the speed with which they can spread thanks to technology is unprecedented, and we need the digital platforms to do a lot more to help identify and stop misinformation from spreading so quickly. And then finally, a big challenge is our leaders. People believe what their leaders tell them. And the single best way to puncture misinformation is to have our leaders regularly, daily, frequently be on the media, be available, answer questions, and really make the case about what you can believe and what you can't believe. And they have to be leaders you trust. And where we get into trouble is where some leaders, like the President of the United States where I live, actually encourage the spreading of misinformation.
You know, so much so that your president, Professor Mel, was talking about using disinfectant and Lysol and Dettol, and everybody else panic coming out and saying the last thing anyone ought to do is start consuming disinfectant. And that really exemplifies the magnitude of this problem, where world leaders, you know, forget whether they're respected or not, they're in charge, they're in the saddle, are almost deliberately and consciously, either knowingly or unknowingly, putting out all this misinformation.
Exactly. I mean, if you do what the President of the United States told you to do yesterday or 2 days ago, you will die. It's toxic. It's poison. A good contrast is the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, who does daily press briefings where he provides a lot of data. He explains things calmly and clearly. He makes it clear the seriousness of the problem. He debunks rumors, but he also communicates that he has a plan and his team have a plan that they are executing to guide his state out of the crisis.
Egan Sweeney, I remember being in a first draft fact-checking training program that you'd run in Singapore, and you've been doing that globally. Do you believe adequate capacities have been built up in mainstream media, in digital media, to be able to respond in double quick time to the virus of fake news? Or do you think it's fake news that spreads faster and everybody's just desperately trying to play catch up?
Well, first, thank you for having me here. Very pleased to be part of this. But yeah, about how much capacity has been built up. I think admirable capacity has been built up. I'm not sure we can ever say that enough capacity has been built up, because this scourge of unreliable information, fake news, whatever you want to call it, is something that is growing all the time. And it's resilient, and the people who are spreading it are resilient. And this is why I'm constantly these days making a case for more and more education of the public in critical, consuming information in a critical way. Because you hear this term infodemic, and there are parallels with an epidemic. There are also parallels in the way, we have fact checkers, we have people verifying and so on. These people, I think, not to stretch the analogy too much, but these people correspond to, say, doctors and public health workers trying to head off an outbreak, trying to treat the symptoms. But what we also need is a huge base of mass education in the basics of how you consume information, and this can parallel, in terms of a medical situation, this can parallel hygiene, sanitation, public health, and so on. So I think it goes far beyond just trying to do this whack-a-mole thing where you're trying to constantly stomp out disinformation and misinformation.
I also want to focus for a moment on what's happening in India. Balkrishnan, as the editor of the India Today's Fact Check Project, there are so many fact check stories that you put out on a weekly basis. Do you think that the amount of fake news coming in has jumped up, or do you think that it's roughly the way it used to be? And what are the specific problems you're noticing in trying to fight fake news in India? Bala.
First thing, Rahul, is that certainly when the COVID came to India, started to coming to India, that there was a great spike in the number of fake news that would get around it. And the interesting thing, Rahul, is that what we observed is that there was a clear-cut pattern in what kind of news, what kind of misinformation, what kind of fake news would come. We could see a pattern through it. Initially, when it started, there were a few cases in India, and it was mainly in China. So we could see that mostly the fake news would come related to China, like the Chinese government has asked permission from Chinese court to kill 20,000 people because they have got coronavirus, and they would see that that videos from Hong Kong would be passed off as China, and Chinese police killing Chinese people. Then the phase came when the cases started coming to India. Then would see all kind of cure advices, that being people saying that taking hot water or garlic or alcohol would cure coronavirus. Then there was a phase when people would give out all kinds of theories that government is doing this, government is going to spray disinfectant through helicopters so that it will stop it. And then there was a phase, as we know, that when Tablighi Jamaat became one of the this factor came. So then we could see that the entire COVID problem took a communal turn. And what is most interesting thing is, Rahul, that when IFCN made an alliance of all the fact checkers across the world, and that put together all the more than 3,500 stories, fact check stories from across the globe. Then we were surprised to see that how different people in different countries, different culture, who speak different language, some of the misinformation, fake stories, unscientific theories, we could see that they were common across the globe in different countries.
Okay, so let's spend a moment discussing that. Professor Nikomel, especially in the United States, and then because the spark is lit, it travels elsewhere, there are a few very clear groups of ideas or thoughts or people who seem to be pushing out a lot of fake news. One is the 5G lobby, then you've got the anti-vaccine lobby. Why? Because there's also prejudice, there is conspiracy, and all of it really leads to a toxic mixture which leads to fake news spreading in the way that it does. What are the groups that you're identifying which you think seem to be key sources of the fake news?
Well, one group we know is people looking to make money from it in some way, shape, or form, because they're selling something, or maybe it's fraudulent, or they're making money from advertising, so they're trying to get as many page views as they can. Another source is definitely politically motivated people who are looking to fire up their base, their most committed supporters, their fanatics. Another group is definitely those involved in hate speech and prejudice in major ways. There's also some evidence that certain other foreign governments spread or encourage the spreading of misinformation in order to encourage instability. So there's a relatively wide, and then there are people just who are pranksters who just think it's funny, and then there are those who do it by accident, who aren't educated enough or don't realize exactly what they're doing. So there's a pretty wide range of motivations for misinformation and fake news, and that makes tackling it much harder.
Bebar Zosk, I remember when you organized the International Fact-Checking Conference in Cape Town in South Africa, one of the key takeaways was that no matter which country of the world you're in, there are similarities. So the language may be different, the local context may be different, but if you zoom out and look at it globally, it's the same kind of fake news that's being peddled in country after country. Is that correct?
That's true, Rahul. That's especially much more, evidence nowadays, especially during our coronavirus facts alliance. We have been seeing more and more same piece of misinformation appears in different countries, especially when you compare the spread of the virus with the spread of misinformation. There are certain similarities that you can easily trace back to country A, and then you can see the same misinformation happening in country B. That was the case, especially when the virus was, moving from Asia to Europe and making Italy as the epicenter of the pandemic. And then just a couple of days later, the same piece of misinformation you were seeing in Italy were just popping up in Spain. And that was just in parallel to the spread of the virus from one country to another. And those are mostly same motivated, piece of misinformation, especially around false lockdowns, false symptoms, false cures. And that shows the motivation behind how those pieces of misinformation appear in different countries, regardless of the difference in culture, difference in language, difference in countries. We can easily say that misinformation do not recognize borders, and it definitely travels faster than the treatment that we are trying to come up with as fact checkers. And that's why we have been trying so hard to collaborate with other fact checkers in different countries, because at the end of the day, fact checking is a time-consuming effort, and it requires additional work to be done using different sources of information. And with our alliance, we have been fortunate enough to see what kind of misinformation appears first in which countries, and how other fact checkers around the world can be ready to tackle that misinformation when they see it.
Egan Srini, one of the big complaints for fact checkers has been that the social media tech giants for a long time were accused of not doing enough to deal with fake news, for being very casual and not taking down fake news fast enough. We know that over the last several months they've been very substantially ramping up capacity and trying to ensure that all the artificial intelligence, machine learning, even human being capacities that they have are being deployed to try and respond in real time to fake news. But do you believe we've reached a place where we can say enough is being done, or do you think that all the tech giants in Silicon Valley and elsewhere need to do a lot more?
I think they could do more. I think it's very hard to quantify, how far they have come and how much more they need to be doing, because they're not operating in a static environment. They're operating, when they're trying to shut down disinformation networks, they're operating against a foe that alters its mode of operation, that they're working against human ingenuity. People want to get this kind of stuff out there. It means you constantly have to shift your footing to try to deal with that. And again, it's why I constantly try to say, we cannot expect that the platforms are going to do this for us. We can't expect that legislation is going to do it for us. It may not even be desirable that legislation does for us. These are all worthwhile parts of dealing with the overall thing, but we still need to be getting this right down to grassroots level, encouraging the public to empower themselves.
I want to show our viewers now some of the work that the India Today Anti-Fake News War Room has been doing to deal with this infodemic, the second pandemic that we're dealing with. There's the virus, there's the fake news virus as well. So let's show you what the Anti-Fake News War Room of the India Today has been doing over the last several weeks in trying to deal with this infodemic.
India Today's Anti-Fake News War Room is at the forefront of fighting this infodemic, busting myths and separating corona facts from fiction. The infodemic is unprecedented, and so are India Today fact-check team's measures to counter it. As a signatory to the International Fact-Checking Network, India Today is working in alliance with fact-checkers across 70 countries to fight the misinformation menace.
The biggest challenge that we face is in the selection of what fake news, what misinformation we want to debunk. Apart from looking into the aspect of virality, what is being shared widely, we also try to make a judgment on the basis of what misinformation can cause maximum damage if that remains unchecked. For example, if somebody is saying that having warm water or garlic can cure coronavirus, this is relatively harmless. But if somebody is trying to convince people to pop up hydroxychloroquine or put bleach on their body to protect them from coronavirus, that becomes absolute priority.
Trends show that fake news related to coronavirus are either about its cure or conspiracy theories about its spread and origin. As the virus began to spread, so did misinformation about China. India Today busted these fake news factories one by one. As coronavirus cases started being reported in India, social media was abuzz with all kinds of hoaxes. From claims about government distributing free masks to disinfectants being sprayed from choppers, all turned out to be false. It was also important to ensure that claims about COVID-19 cure that were furiously forwarded on WhatsApp were duly verified. But the infodemic in India took a communal turn after the COVID-19 scare at Tablighi Jamaat event in Delhi's Nizamuddin. India Today busted several false allegations that were being circulated as a part of a deliberate hate campaign. Across social media platforms, it is WhatsApp that is used the most to amplify misinformation. That is why India Today's fact-check team is personally responding to people on WhatsApp about queries related to any claims or videos about the pandemic.
In India, maximum misinformation circulates on WhatsApp group. What you get on WhatsApp is mostly passive information. People keep forwarding these messages, hoping that somebody else will do a fact check for them. That is why when we do a fact check story on something that we got on WhatsApp, we try to push it back in as many WhatsApp groups as possible.
India Today's fact-check team is working relentlessly to give clarity in these confusing times of a global health crisis. Bureau Report, India Today.
One of the new problems that's cropped up is the fact that you now have a surfeit of Chinese social media apps, and a lot of the most potent fake news has actually come on Chinese social media apps. So much so that in fact after India Today ran a big open source investigation story, TikTok had to come out and say that thousands of videos which were spreading misinformation have been taken down. Bala, explain what had happened and why it's not just what's happening in San Francisco, given how Chinese tech is emerging. Keeping a very close eye on Chinese social media giants becomes crucial as well, because we've got images of doctors going, medical staff going into various areas. They're being chased by locals over there because their brain is being filled with all kinds of propaganda and misperceptions. Bala.
Rahul, you're talking about the Chinese apps like TikTok, you use one, Facebook. So what we have seen is, and what is very commonly known is, that most of the people in India where data is cheap, and most of the people who are illiterate, and many of the people are illiterate, and they keep on consuming whatever is pushed to them. Like if you play a video on TikTok, so the TikTok, once you see something on TikTok, the next video starts playing itself, and then the algorithm takes over. It is similar case in case of Facebook, and so generally people keep on consuming the stuff that is pushed to them, and they hardly they hardly seek actively. They hardly go to any particular website like WHO website to seek what is the correct information, even that the information is right available in the Google, on the Facebook, on the top of Facebook. So that is one problem. So what we have seen is, Rahul, that if you analyze, if you try to segregate this fake news that we debunk, we can broadly divide them into three groups. First is the kind of people who deliberately push some kind of agenda. There may be anti-vaccine lobby, there may be some political lobby who are just trying to push some agenda, and you can make out from the kind of messages that they push that this is deliberately being pushed. The second kind is the kind of people who try to make money out of it. They are just looking to sell something, or at least they are looking for some clicks, some more likes, so that their Facebook gets or the page that they have made gets more like, and it becomes more famous. And the third is the kind of people who are really ignorant because they think that this is something genuine, or they're not sure about it. They keep on sharing. They generally either they genuinely believe in this, or they keep send it to somebody else, so that they genuinely think that they are doing some kind of social service in forwarding these messages.
Now, so Egan Srini, there are two problems. One is that some people, and that's very often, I see with some of my friends or relatives in our family groups, are just passing information because they got it. It's like WhatsApp University. They got the information, they forwarded the information without pausing to stop for a moment and think, is this correct? Not looking at the source of it. And these are very qualified people from some of the best educational institutes. So it's not as if you're educated, you're likely to ward off fake news. You could be passing on fake news no matter what your level of qualification.
Yeah, I think this is very important, Rahul, that it is the absolute ease of sharing these things, that you can do it without a moment's thought, and it doesn't cost you anything in terms of effort or in terms of intellectual effort. It's simply touching your screen and you pass this on to other people. So that's why I think it's one of the reasons it's so hard to stop it. But also outside of those kind of intelligent circles as well, or educated circles, I should say, one of the big problems we have is the way that the technology is spreading. The way the telecommunications companies have made it cheaper to get data. They have spread their operations very, very widely. Data is cheap, devices are cheap, and you have people who may have practically no education. They've never had the privilege of an education, but yet they have a smartphone in their hand, they have WhatsApp on it, and they're getting all this stuff pushed under their noses without ever having had the benefit of an education to teach them how to deal with this. So I think there's a huge question to be asked there. If we are spreading communications that widely, shouldn't we also be spreading education? Because I don't think there's any value in trying to restrict flows of information, but if we are putting this information under the noses of so many people, shouldn't these companies be taking responsibility for also funding education in those locales?
Do you think, Kanchan Kaur, there should be penalties for spreading fake news? Is that at all possible to ensure that there are consequences if somebody does it? It's a grey area because on the one side, the person who forwarded some fake news could say, I got it, it looked real, how am I supposed to authenticate whether this is real or not? I got it, I forwarded it. Can that person be held responsible? Does that make sense at all?
I don't think it makes sense at all, because penalty is really basically you're shooting the messenger. It's very, very difficult to track and see where that fake news was actually coming from. Instead, I think we should spend a lot of energy and time on media literacy, on telling people what they should look for when something comes across. When they get something, you just teach them to stop, breathe, look at it, and then decide whether they want to forward it at all, or in the first place, don't share it at all if you're not sure of where the information is coming from. A lot of people have very little idea on how the media works, on how news gets circulated, even whether it's on WhatsApp or even if it's just information anywhere else. All like Owen said, all you need to do is just touch your phone and move it on. And people need to be taught to think critically. And I think that is a long-term solution. I don't think there are any quick fix problems over here. We've got to look at it in the long term. We've got to spread media literacy. We've got to spread, more importantly, critical thinking. We've got to evolve a culture of questioning. And that is a big problem in India just now.
Behbaz Dost, there's been so much relentless scrutiny on social media giants based out of San Francisco. How do you look at the new problem that emerges from China? Apps, especially in places like rural India, now hugely popular, arguably more so than some of the more wanted apps coming out of SFO. And those companies not under so much pressure, and what's happening is virtually subterranean. Nobody's really looking deep enough with a magnifying glass seeing what they're doing just at this moment.
That's
That's true, Rahul, and that's actually worrying so many fact checkers nowadays because we have been seeing so many falsehoods and misinformation originating from apps that the fact checkers don't have any access in. We have been criticizing WhatsApp, Facebook over the last couple of years for their lack of transparency, but at the end of the day, at least fact checkers have been able to get to the origin of the misinformation, especially on Facebook. WhatsApp is a two-level encrypted messaging app, but when it comes to handling misinformation and detecting the origin, it's getting much more harder on apps that are mostly originating from China. And this is becoming a serious problem because there are not so many activists or campaigns around making those apps more accountable in China. This is becoming some concern when those companies are moving their business to the United States and also starting new bodies which don't have linkages between their headquarters in China but have organic links. So it's becoming harder to differentiate the policies that they have in China and the United States or in other countries where you have more access to information, and it's becoming a gray area in making those companies more accountable to their users and to the public.
Kanchan Kaur, one of the problems I'm noticing is that a lot of the fake news seems to play to societal or religious prejudice, or at least an attempt to fuel that, which is why we've seen with a lot of these doctors being beaten up. It's almost as if people living in those localities had been whipped into some state of frenzy where they just started believing the worst, that these doctors are here to take you away, or they'll put you in jail, or that they'll lock you up, or they'll give you some vaccine that you're being used as a guinea pig, etc. None of which was true, but that was what was being spread. It played to their prejudice, and it got registered and entrenched deep in their minds.
Yes, that's true. So this is if you look at research in social behavior. So there are two things over here. One, this comes from a lack of trust in what the government is telling you, and a lack of trust in civil society, in the neighbors, in your immediate societal circles. The other thing which research tells us that you will believe what you want to believe. You're not likely to move away from your belief systems. And if something works with your belief systems, you will go ahead and believe it. If you're the kind who will believe in astrology, you will believe that lighting lamps at 9 o'clock for 9 minutes has a bigger meaning to it. And similarly, if you are already in some ways think that you are being attacked, you will take that belief further, and you will not trust anyone who is even coming to help you. Even the health workers will be mistrusted because you are already under a lot of pressure.
This is where I want to conclude this conversation. We've spoken a lot over the past 40 minutes about different aspects of the fake news virus and what can be done to deal with it. Now, our attempt really is to look at the problem and to try and see how we can fight conspiracies with facts. For joining us on this broadcast, Beba Zorsk, Director of the International Fact-Checking Network at the Poynter Institute from Florida. Thank you very much. Professor Kanchan Kaur from joining us from Bengaluru. Thanks, Egan Sweeney from Berlin. Professor Nico Mel from Boston, Massachusetts. And Balkrishna, our fact-check editor, for joining us. Thank you very much. This is not where we're ending. We're on this story non-stop, and I just want to tell our viewers that tomorrow in the evening, Sunday the 26th of April, we will have a very important conversation on how work from home is going. We've lined up top corporate honchos cutting across crucial sectors to talk about whether work from home will be the new normal. Is productivity up? Is productivity down? Companies like the Tata Consultancy with 4 lakh plus employees just announced that 70%, 75% of their employees will be work from home even after this pandemic gets over. So there's a lot to think about. What about isolation? What about just feeling of frustration, home office lines blurring? So we'll get deep into all those issues with some of the top rated corporate experts who are looking at productivity under this lockdown. This is the world's biggest disruption, and we're doing our best to try and cover it in different aspects. We're slipping into a break. I'll have more for you when we come back on the other side. Stay with us.
Hi everyone, Preeti Chaudhary here. Hope you like this video. For latest news and analysis, like and subscribe to the India Today YouTube channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated. Thank you for watching.